It was really helpful to read in today's study about coins. And so let's start with the scripture that is for today. It's Mark 12:15. 12:13 through 17, and I'll read that. Let's see, is that right? Yeah, 13 through 17. 12, 13 through 17. Okay. Then they sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarii and let me see it." And they brought one. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Jesus said to them, "Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and give to God the things that are God's." And they were utterly amazed at him. So, just to put this scripture in context, Jesus was trying to be trapped by the people, by the Herodians and the Pharisees, which is what they were constantly trying to do to kind of stump him and trap him. But of course, Jesus always turns the tables on the people that try to sort of snag him and ask them the questions that they ask him. Right? He's always asking questions, which I love, because it gives us permission to ask questions. Whoops. I can get that. Thank you. Thanks. Let's see. What comes to mind when you think about coins, when you think about money, in particular coins? What, like, in the context of this text, what is it that, what is it that pops up for you, if anything?
The sound of coins. I think of the olden times in Las Vegas when you could hit the one-armed bandit, and if you got three of the same thing going across, and all the coins coming down, and people going, that you won a jackpot of something, and all the coins coming down. Of course, it doesn't happen today. You only get a little slip of paper.
Oh.
But the sound of coins, the noise.
Yeah.
Of all the coins coming down.
Yeah, slot machines. That's really interesting, the sound, because I hadn't thought about that.
I think about the box of coins I have from all over the world. What do we do with them? I mean, I got them from China, most countries in the world.
Use it for golf ball markers on the green.
That's what I don't play golf.
That's what I do with them.
Yeah.
When I think about money, I was in Scotland standing in line at the train station, and I dropped a Scottish penny, which that's an American penny, and I wasn't going to be bothered picking it up. This old gentleman picked it up and handed it to me. He says, "If you watch your pennies, the pounds will watch themselves." That was a good lesson.
So if you watch your pennies, the what?
The pounds, their dollars and
Right.
cents are in pounds. So the pounds will watch themselves.
I see.
I think coins today are becoming almost insignificant. You don't see many coins.
Right.
I don't carry coins. I don't carry money.
Yeah.
Obsolete.
Probably shouldn't be.
Canada did away with pennies, I believe. Somebody told me.
Well, now we're going to Bitcoins, whatever that is.
Yeah. Virtual money.
Never explain it to me.
I don't understand it. Go ahead, Phyllis.
Well, and I think of coins. I didn't think of this originally, but she talks about idolatry, and that comes to my mind. That the coins helped
Yes, that's a really good point. Yeah, so money, we can't live with it, we can't live without it sometimes, or we don't want to live with it. And it hasn't always been here. People used to trade, right? When the indigenous people lived here, they didn't have money. They bartered and they traded and they grew what they needed and I guess lived, simply. But money, like it's kind of big business. I mean, you have to have money in order to be in any way living in this world, to buy what you need. So what do we do with coins? We don't do much right now because coins are becoming obsolete, but what do we do with the money that we have?
Least coin,
PW, right. Some of them are becoming collector's items, because they are, I guess, they're special coins that we have, coins that are from other countries. We can't always use the currency that other countries make for their country. We have specific kinds of coins that holds different value. And I guess one of the things that she pointed out, the author, is who's represented on the coins that we have.
Different presidents,
Okay, so different presidents.
depending on countries.
Mm-hmm.
We have different premiers or, what are they? Queens.
Queens,
their
right,
Representatives,
Right.
kings.
Mm-hmm.
Things from our past, like the buffalo nickel.
Yeah, that we don't see very often.
Can't work with that.
God gets his foot in the door, though, not in the picture, but it usually says, "In God we trust."
Right.
Picture of Washington on one side.
Mm-hmm. Right. On the back, there's usually, like Jim said, some image
Or
of,
wheat.
or
Wheat-
what?
Wheat on the pennies.
Wheat pennies. Right.
A lot of Latin sometimes.
Question, when did the in God we trust become part of our coins? Has it always been? No. I actually know that.
Lovely.
My brother Jim interned, or what they call it, paged for Charles Bennett from here. So this area has something to do with that. His big campaign, his big mission as a representative to Congress was to get in God we trust put on our money.
Wow.
When was that?
It hasn't always been on our coins.
When was that?
Okay, so,
Sorry, I asked the question.
yeah, sorry, yeah, I have to figure, it's like the late fifties, it's in the fifties.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, that kind of goes against the separation of church and state.
Mm. Right.
I'm sure that was probably controversial at the time.
Yes. I mean, money is a very controversial subject within the church, just because there's such the history, right, within also like the Reformation and why that happened, because there was misuse of money that was coming in. People's tithes were not being used wisely by the church, and so there was pushback. And so yeah, and so it says, "In God we trust." Do we trust God with our money? I mean, how do we do that? What does that look like? Any thoughts on that? How do we trust God with our money?
You're supposed to get manna every day, but in other words, manna from heaven,
Mm.
everything we're always supposed
Right.
to take out each day, and I thought, good luck. I mean, it is difficult.
Yeah,
Give us this day our daily bread.
Already.
right. And so bread can be, sometimes money is referred to as bread, like give me some bread, like in the 60s or whatever, bread. And I guess it can be a form. You can buy bread.
And then people went to took too much, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and
And what is too much?
Hoarding.
Right.
they ordered it, and then it just kind of evaporated because
Yeah.
you just provided daily what you needed, and people were so afraid, or they said, "Oh, if we take more, then we'll."
Yeah. No. What were you going to say, Phyllis?
Well, Charles Bennett didn't see this question, but this is the question he was answering when he made that his project in Congress. Where do you place your ultimate loyalty? So he wanted that motto on money so that we saw where our ultimate loyalty should be placed when we were using money for day-to-day things and honoring political figures on it, but the ultimate loyalty was God.
Right. Which is, I think, what Jesus is getting at in this scripture, right? I mean, we give to Caesar, in this case, what is Caesar's. We pay our taxes like good citizens, and and then we worship God. We do not worship the people on these coins. I think that's the ultimate goal. Although it can be tricky because sometimes I think money can have this power over us to keep, there's never enough money sometimes. Like, you can't make enough. We always need to, more. And then storing it up, like you said, we put it in stocks, we put it in money markets, we put it in real estate. Like, money can be invested in many ways that makes more money. And so I just think it's interesting because money can kind of take on a life of its own, right? I mean, it just can. And then, I don't know, it's hard sometimes to know what is enough. And then what do we do with the surplus? We have to live. I don't think, in this case, it's Jesus is saying, go sell all that you have. But who do we worship? Who is worthy, of worship? Who are we loyal to ultimately? And how is loyalty measured? Like, how do we measure our loyalty and our trust in God? Like, how does that look?
I think the book was saying when times are tough and you really want to give up, that's the time where you really should believe that God is with you, not feel, like I'm alone, I can't deal with this. We're supposed to remember that God is with us. I often don't, but we're supposed to.
Right. What other good point that God is always with us, and so what other passages around coins or money do you recall? Does any passage come to mind that revolves around money, this kind of currency that Jesus talks about? There's,
The woman with the least coin.
right, the woman with the least coin.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the whole story.
Right. There's one, the woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house and search. Oh, what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? So there's that one, the loss of money and that being important to go find the coin. Also, this one is a really popular passage. Making a whip of cords, Jesus drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. That's always disturbed me, that because Jesus is really angry. Any thoughts about why Jesus would be angry in this particular case? So just contextually, Jesus has just ridden into Jerusalem on the donkey, on the colt. And right after the big parade, if you will, where Jesus is riding in and the hosannas from the people, he steps into the temple and he witnesses the marketplace, right? And what these money changers and these marketers are doing. And he doesn't like it. I wonder why.
They were profiting. They were profiting off of
Profiting.
their exchanges,
Mm-hmm.
and he just,
Right, right,
they were making money off the poor,
Right.
obviously. And
right.
he just,
They were doing it for personal gain, not God's.
yes,
Mhm.
I mean, they were, using these people,
Yeah.
taking advantage of the poor, and he just, away with it.
Yeah.
They were also selling script. If you were going to worship in the temple, you had to buy special money in order to make an offering,
Mm.
or buy a sheep, or whatever you were going to do. And they set the rates of exchange,
Mm.
and could set them unfavorably.
So it sounds like it was set up to prosper some and really diminish others, or because I guess some of what were being sold were doves, and I guess not everybody could afford doves. Some had to buy pigeons because they couldn't afford doves, but so yeah, like the poor were not considered, and they were on the outside. They were not on the inside of this marketplace. They were kept out, and so that whole passage comes about where Jesus, he turns the tables, he clears the deck basically, and opens the doors so that the poor and the marginalized can then come in, so that they are invited in. It's always disturbed me, but after I preached on it a few months ago, and it really took on new meaning, because I thought Jesus had every right to be angry, because there was misuse of money there, and there were some people were being favored, and other people were being really excluded from what was being sold and what was the money exchange, I guess. But so how does Jesus overall look at the money texts? Like when Jesus talks about money, what kind of texts are there that kind of convey how Jesus felt about money, and also considering Jesus wasn't rich by any means in that way. These texts, they paid 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. So that was about Judas, right? Yeah. It seems to me that that the passages that Jesus references, that are referenced by Jesus around money, are ones where Jesus is kind of warning people and pointing and saying, Jesus lifted up the poor and brought down the rich. That's what Jesus kind of ultimate, according to the Magnificat, right? So like, what is currency? What kind of currency do we have as people, and how does that inform our decisions about money?
I think any of these passages, Jesus is teaching us that it's what's in your heart that counts, not how big your offering is.
Yeah. So like, how do we then go about being stewards, right? Good stewards of what we have, and representing people that may not be represented on money. I think the people represented on the coins I'm holding here are, yes, they're many of whom are founders of this country, but none of whom are women. There are mostly men on these, all men, let's just say. So is that, who we're to uplift? I mean, women certainly have brains.
Have the silver dollar there, Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony. So, and Maya Angelou, I think, was just Harriet Tubman on what? I don't know. But anyway, like putting like representation of not just, one population of people, but the other, because this is a multicultural country, right? So there are other people that have representation and value and on these coins.
But I think when the women appear on a coin, they're collector's items.
Oh, how interesting. Oh, interesting. Yeah. I've
They go off the market
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that social currency often equals the economic currency? Like, do you think that people who have more are then more popular and kind of revered socially? I mean, what is the parallel between people, like our social currency? Like, how does that come about? How do we gain social currency as people?
Well, Buffett's okay.
What?
Buffett is okay.
Buffett's okay, but like, how did Buffett get to be where Buffett is? You know what I'm saying? Huh?
He gave away his money.
Well,
Bill Gates.
right. Well, people who are entrepreneurial, right, who are inventors and who are people who actually create things we can use. Or, I mean, I'm thinking too about the film industry. Don't we kind of, I mean, aren't movie stars and filmmakers, aren't they often revered, and don't they have a lot of social currency? I think they do.
And football players. Basketball. And football.
Oh, yeah. Sports figures, those who are the best in their sport, often have a lot of social currency and influence. I mean, the NBA, NCAA is going on right now, right? And so a lot of people are tuning in to those games because they're exciting, and we like to see good games. And there's some that, you know, kind of rise above others in their ability. Yeah, ability is another thing. Don't we have more social status if we're more able-bodied? I don't know if a disabled person is on, you know, if we consider them people that have a lot of currency, but they certainly have value. And it's not something I tend to think about a lot because I'm, you know, I'm very able-bodied, but I think it's important to be aware.
In the church too, that people who have given a lot of money,
Yeah.
you know, what is the, well, Brakefield Scholarship, but I'm thinking more of, wasn't it the Buckman, what's that fund that you can apply for within the church? You can
Oh, the
apply-
Baldwin grant?
Oh, the Baldwin Grant.
Baldwin, sorry,
Yeah.
couldn't remember the name. Oh, really?
That's a wonderful example of someone who donated a large sum of money for creative ventures in the church, right? For missions that are creative and will bring, you know, move us forward, which I think is a lovely way. It's in the church, right? I mean, the church, these lights and this air conditioning, or I guess it's air conditioning, it doesn't just run on its own. It costs money, right? We have to pay the bills. This building didn't get built without a lot of people investing in the walls and in the wood and in the structure, in the layout. I mean, different people had different kinds of currency. Some may have been designers, others could donate. There was prayer currency. But I just think it's interesting too to look at the different kinds of currency that we may or may not realize that we have or that people have in the world, or lack of currency. What kinds of, and I think too, the choices that we have around how we spend our money are very different sometimes contextually. So I've never had to decide whether or not to buy a tank of gas or groceries. Like, that has never been something that I have struggled with. Some of you may have, and that is something I'm not in touch with, but I feel like it is, Jesus is saying that it's important to be in touch with the people who are struggling to just, you know, for food to eat, because gas prices are not going down, and, you know, go.
As we read these texts, I think it's important to remember that in the background, there are no banks.
Ah,
The coins are issued by the government,
Mm.
and they make their way in the world, but what the system ends up requiring is money changers.
Mm.
If you do a day's work and get paid in denarius, what do you do with it? You've got to take it somewhere and get it broken up so that you can live your life. And that implies a tremendous amount of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a certain amount of security, because the money changers are vulnerable to theft and attack and so on. It's a system that seems a little foreign to us until the day comes that you're standing in line at an ATM and you get robbed.
Mm.
Then I think it begins to come home to you.
Following up on that, money changers could be like the check cashing places we have now that charge exorbitant fees to cash your paycheck. And those are usually the people that don't have a lot of money that are going to these places to get the loans on their paychecks and cashing their checks for exorbitant fees.
Mm-hmm.
Because the banks won't do it.
Well, if you don't have an
Well,
account,
you don't have to have an account.
they won't.
That's what I'm saying, they don't have enough money to have an account.
So they,
Maybe it's justified
Charge
to
them.
take that risk here and that, but I'm sure the fees are quite high compared to other places.
Mm-hmm.
Means of money changing.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. That we, yeah, the systems, in which we live. And like, how we earn money is also important. I mean, there are different ways that we can work to earn money. Sometimes people don't even have to work because they have, there's generational wealth that has trickled down and has created this sort of elite way that some people just have this without even, just being born into a particular family might actually create this way that a person doesn't have to, they're born with a silver spoon in their mouth, so to speak, right? And they don't really have to even be engaged. I will say I heard, I was listening to the radio or some podcast, and I heard a person, a guy on there talking about how he went through college and began to work, maybe did like an internship overseas working with people in housing, trying to, and came, I think he came back into the States. I don't know, I'm not completely clear about this and I didn't catch his name. But he said working with people and being that one who sort of people went to he worked with somebody like affordable housing for people who couldn't afford housing. He worked in that realm and he did financial work around that. And when he said that, and he came from a family where he had the checks going into his account without doing a thing, right? And they just appeared there and he had like all this money from the family in which he was born, that he was born into. And he said at one point he just could not live with the fact that he had money coming into his checking account. It just appeared there without any kind of movement on his part. All he had to do was just cash the checks and spend the money. But there are these people who were unable to really afford to live very well, and the lack of which that he was seeing that there is in the world. And he literally just cut himself off from the family wealth and continued to do the work and advocate for the people who really he felt like needed to have people like him in the world advocating for them and for their well-being. And so I just think there are people in the world who feel called by whatever reasons to serve in that way, to also relinquish what they've been given. I don't think all of us are called to do that, but I do think tithing, right, is supposed to like pinch a little. I think it might be like, you know what I'm saying? it's hard sometimes to make, unless it's pulled out of your account or unless it's built into your budget. It can be hard to let go of money because we can do lots of different things with the money, right? And so it can be difficult, for me anyway, to let go of something that I think is mine. But if I'm really thinking about the words of Jesus and the people in the world who who do have to think about maybe choosing between gas and groceries, the people who are not able to afford to buy a home, to live even in an apartment. Down here, the rent has gotten so inflated that so many people cannot afford to live in an apartment at the beach. It's a first world problem, but my son is got a really good job with a bank, and he's worked hard these last few years, and he would like to buy a house. But every time he tries to put an offer on a house, it's like it's gone. It's not only that people are paying asking prices, but they're paying tens of thousands of dollars over the asking price, right? And so it's just like, how is anybody supposed to build wealth when they can't afford to purchase, something like a home or a condo or anything like that? So paying cash, yeah. And it's not even often like, a first home. It's maybe a second or a third, or just something for an investment, right? But it's just, there are lots of forces, that are vying for the same properties. And are we even supposed to own land? That's another thing that I have a question about. Are we supposed to own land? Is it supposed to be possessed? Are we supposed to be possessors of land? What do you think about that?
Well, if you're a farmer and you don't own the land, you have to pay rent on that land.
Right.
Now you try to put a crop on that land, okay? And try to make ends meet, it isn't going to work. Or if it does, you're making minimal, very minimal. So it does pay to own land for a farmer.
Right. That's a good point. Phyllis?
Our small group is reading a book about Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah, which I thought I had read the whole Bible, but I was not that familiar with Jeremiah. But there's a story of one tribe of Israel that was not a tribe, a group of Israelites that were told by God to be nomads. Never own land. And then, on the other hand, when the Israelites were taken captive, they learned through Jeremiah that God wanted them to settle down where they were. Not hope to go back to that other place that you loved. Settle down, buy land, raise crops, raise a family. So it seems that God's plan is for some people to own land and other people not to. I'm being wisdom from that. I'm just stating what I just learned.
Well said, Phyllis.
Thank you. Jim, I just was reading the same book.
That sounds really interesting.
But if you're going to cooperate as families, you've got to settle somewhere.
Right.
You think? I mean, a garden you're talking about and all that sort of stuff. You've got to have a center. Okay, we all go on market day and we are.
Right. In the early ancient Near East, one of the things I found fascinating in my Old Testament class was that before there was centralized power, people lived communally on land. They shared their resources. They did not consider anything, they didn't possess anything that wasn't shared. And I just think it's a beautiful concept, right, that I can't really imagine because I live in a house on a particular piece of land that we bought and with a family. However, there's something there that I think is really rich and beautiful about people sharing and living among each other. I mean, it ain't perfect, I'm sure, because there are issues that come up. But I do think that there is something to be said for living more in community. And if we look at the way Jesus lived, I mean, and who Jesus collected as friends. He collected the tax collectors and, all the people that were not necessarily considered popular or well-liked. But I think both and. But, Jesus wasn't partial, like it says in the passage. Jesus wasn't partial. But I think to just have an eye toward that, like, not just, I don't know. I'm just curious about land and ownership, and what do we own, what is ours, and how is it passed down, and is there room for other people to, like, how do we share land? How is land accessible? How are the beaches accessible? How are, you know what I mean? How are different pieces of property? Like, there was one dispute about a beachfront homeowner who sued someone who walked up close to their beach house, because I guess there's if you walk, there's some law that says if you walk beyond the tide zone, that it's considered trespassing, right?
That's in front of the state legislature this past session, and then last session also. They keep debating on whether the property owner on the ocean owns the property down to the mean high water line. And of course, there's a dispute that where is that mean high water line? And sometimes it comes up closer, sometimes it doesn't. And then, of course, it's always been assumed in Florida that all of the beaches are, state property.
Right.
Park. So this has recently come up in the last 2 or 3 years.
So,
Yeah.
And the people that you're talking about that have the property, they would purposely set up cameras and everything to try to find this one lady that could walk her dog or whatever. So it's,
so if you own a house, on the ocean, right on the beach, and tide comes up and washes your house away, who do you sue? God?
state or whatever they.
No,
FEMA.
no. It's
I don't
just
know.
like, you build in a flood zone, you have to take the risk. You're taking a risk. So you can't just sue somebody because your house was destroyed.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question that's happening there. But the beach, right, that's kind of something I've never thought of as anybody else's land. I consider it a natural resource that all people should be able to enjoy. But there are private beaches, I guess, not able to be accessed by some.
I was going to say, in the 60s, communes used to be very popular. I don't know about down here, but up north, they were very popular. And everybody was a flower child, and everybody was going to the communes.
And what do you think about that? What do you think about people who live together and shared resources? I mean,
I said no.
yeah. Well, I think there would have to be some boundaries agreed upon. He did. Your husband wanted to move into a commune.
I wanted to, but when I left college, Koinonia Farms,
Yeah.
Georgia. But, I was easily convinced by my wonderful, at that time, we got to say that we should go ahead and go to grad school.
Well, can you speak a little bit about Koinonia Farms and how that operates and
Well, I
what
still
attracted
haven't-
you?
I haven't kept up with it. Does it still exist?
I think so, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, it was a Christian commune founded on Acts in the Bible, how the original Christians lived. And we studied it in Young Life Leadership at the University of Florida, and I said, that's where I'm going. But they did truly share the land and the products of the land, and the people who had talents in child care or health, did pursue those, a little education in those, and then shared it with the group. I don't know the specifics of their finances, though, because at that time of life, I didn't care.
Well, that was based on Christianity. The ones I was
Totally
thinking about
based- it was a
were
Christian
based on
commune,
fact
but
or
I
whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I still get kind of started when I talk about
That's good.
Yeah.
A little different group from Riverside, didn't they try and regentrify an area? I think some of the pastors moved into areas, the sheriff moved in. I don't know if it was Springfield, but it was
I
one
think
of
it
the
was
communities.
Brooklyn.
Was it Brooklyn?
I think so.
They tried to, I don't know that worked out so well.
No, I agree. I think that's a really good example. It was before I arrived at Riverside, but what I remember being told is that there were a few members of Riverside that saw this blighted area and wanted to sort of transform it to be more useful, I guess, to the people to whom they were ministering. And so, yeah, they went in and, you know what, the question I have is, did they work with the people that lived there and ask them what their needs were? Or did they just go in and think, we know what's best, we're going to do what we think? You know what I'm saying?
Good question.
Do what we want.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So in that way, I feel like maybe that's a good way to sort of think about, like making a difference. Do we work with the people that are actually in need, or do we just think we know what they need and hand it to them? Like, that is a really good question. Are there any other thoughts about coins and anything that we've discussed here? Any other?
I have a question. Why does the church say 10%? Why did we decide on that? Why not 15, 20, whatever?
There is actually a place, I want to say in Deuteronomy or somewhere in the Old Testament, that talks about offering 10% of your whatever you have as being a fair way to tithe. But I think there is something
It's
biblical.
changed so much though today.
Yeah,
Because back then, I mean, that 10%, that was the social safety net for all the people that had nothing.
right.
Today, the government gives you so much money, yet you still give 10%, or you give more, and you give to all these other nonprofits as well, trying to make a difference. But there's just so much giving.
So much, yes. Someone told me I ran in the Avondale Road race yesterday, and I saw Leighton there with Scott. They were running that first mile. It was so cute. But they benefited the Sanctuary on 8th Street, which is a nonprofit that really works with youth, after school, people who have. It used to be a very blighted area, the Sanctuary, but that's also an area that's being gentrified in Springfield. But one of the women that I was with said, and they're not Jacksonville natives, if there is ever a native, you know what I'm saying? They moved to Jacksonville about 8 years ago and said, we realize or have heard that Jacksonville has the most nonprofits of any city. And I was like, well, wow, that's a lot. Like, we must really need them. Because there's, I mean, maybe we really need all the nonprofit, but it speaks to your point about there are so many nonprofits in Jacksonville. But I think there's probably a lot of need.
Well, there is, but when you think about it, first of all, you're taxed by the government. to
Right.
Support these programs. Then you tithe the church, then you give this, and then you give there. And I mean, it's just amazing how much you
It is.
giving away.
And then to wonder, like, how is that money being used and spent? And, you trust based on, I guess, doing the research around the organizations that you invest in, either with your time, because I used to work downtown at desk, or like just because you can't volunteer the time, you give, and it does, like, sometimes for me anyway, giving is just about knowing that I'm doing this. It is an act of faith, and knowing that it is something that I can do, right, to help maybe relieve some of the oppression. But I do think it's incumbent upon us to do the homework to see that wherever we're putting our money, they're using it in the way that we like, that we believe that they say that they're using it. Because I know a lot of money, has not been used in the way, and that's just people on earth, right? I mean, that's
Money changers.
yeah, the money changers. Yeah, right. But Jesus loved all of us and all of the money changers, but it was also like Jesus got mad because he saw the injustices in the world and in his community. And Jesus, was not wealthy. I think his own parents had to buy pigeons as offerings. They weren't able to afford doves. So Jesus came out of a place of identifying with the poor, because Jesus was basically poor and nomadic and relied on, the communal sharing that, and the grace and goodness of other people that he often invited not only to have meals with him, but to eat at their own homes. So there's a lot to look at there. But I do think this whole idea of coins is challenging. It's challenging for me, and I feel like it's really good to have conversations around stuff that's uncomfortable. And so I appreciate.
I have a question about, Friday, in the last chapters.
Mhm.
My problem is, I don't understand when something like Ukraine happens and all these people are dying. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, where is God? And then I understand we're supposed to be patient, that God works in his own time. But this is when I get all chewed up about, what can we do? We can send money, but what is the problem in terms of God? How am I supposed to be looking at that country and saying, where's God?
I think a lot of people are asking that question because there's no easy answer.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed to say in that chapter that we're just supposed to, it's not in our time that God moves, but
Mhm.
it's,
Well, I mean, I think about to your point, I think about the people who historically have suffered at the hands of others. I think about slavery in this country, right? I mean, why did God allow all these people to be lynched, to die, and it to be a spectacle, like Jesus' crucifixion, right? Like, why do people have to die? And why doesn't God intervene and step in? And one of the women that I'm reading about says, God doesn't necessarily rescue, right, people in their times of need, but God is always with, and advocating for and in the people who are suffering. So while God doesn't fix it, God is inherently in it, in the mix, and with the people who are suffering, and I would have to say with the people who are driving the swords, if you will, like the people who are persecuting. I think it's complicated. But I do think from learning from the wisdom of people who have been oppressed and who have been in those situations where they're calling out for God's help, and where is God, that they claim that God is with them, and they create music, right? And they sing songs in the midst of their grief and their suffering. And that is some sense of solace for them, and God's presence. And it's hard, right? It's hard to accept. But I do believe that. And I believe God is with each one of us, in our struggles. However minor they may seem in the big picture, I believe. Like, as Tom R. often says, help my unbelief. So I'd like to end with this prayer at the end of the chapter that I just read. Let us pray. God of the lost and found, we rejoice that you seek us out, never give up on us, and throw a divine party when we repent and turn to you. As we go about our day, help us discover signs of your presence and care. May seemingly small things, like random pennies and discovered dimes, bring forth praise, joy, and an assurance that you never leave us alone. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.